Good day, my friends. It's a pleasure to be able to share with you information on the principles of the social doctrine of the Catholic Church. Disciples of Christ have a part to play in building a just and peaceful world. The document Justice in the World, produced at the end of the 1971 Synod of Bishops, affirmed that, and I quote, action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world fully appear to be a constitutive dimension of the preaching of the gospel. The social doctrine of the Church is integral to our faith as Catholics. It is also intended for all people of goodwill. It is the body of doctrine developed by the Catholic Church on matters of social justice. It belongs to the field of moral theology. It provides a framework for evaluating societal issues. It is critical for conscience formation. The US bishops remind us that Catholicism does not call us to abandon the world, but to help shape it. We are expected to examine the signs of the times through the lens of Catholicism, in light of the gospel and in the context in which we live. Pope Francis has proclaimed a jubilee year from the 24th of December 2024 to January 6, 2026. The theme is Pilgrims of Hope. Central to this spirituality, this spiritual journey, is the call to social justice, a principle deeply rooted in the tradition of the Jubilee. I was fortunate enough to have been present at the Vatican in 2004 for the launch of the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church. This document was requested by St. John Paul II and issued by the Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace. It offers a complete overview of the framework of Catholic social teaching. It's available online as well. And paragraph 580 states, the immediate purpose of the Church's social doctrine is to propose the principles and values that can sustain a society worthy of the human person. It is based on scripture, tradition, and the wisdom of the magisterium, and is communicated through formal teaching documents such as papal, conciliar, and episcopal documents. It proposes principles for reflection, criteria for judgment, and guidelines for action. It addresses political, economic, ecological, and cultural issues through the light of the gospel. The Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, led by its president, Cardinal Michael Cerny, is primarily focused on promoting the Catholic Church's social doctrine. Paragraph 1928 of our Catechism tells us that society ensures social justice when it provides the conditions that allow individuals and associations to obtain what is their due according to their nature and their vocation. Social justice is linked to the common good and the exercise of authority. Pope Francis has said, none of us can think we are exempt from concerns for the poor and for social justice. Jesus tells us what the protocol is on which we will be judged. It is the one we read in chapter 25 of Matthew's Gospel. Now let's consider the biblical origins of the social doctrine of the Catholic Church. In the Old Testament, Prophet Micah says in verse 6, chapter 6, verse 8, this is what God asks of you, only this, to act justly, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly with your God. And Amos, we know for Amos, worship of God is meaningless unless it's also put into daily action. He said, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. The New Testament teaches us about God's justice. Jesus' life and ministry was a life of inclusion, compassion, forgiveness, a concern for the poor, the marginalized, and the vulnerable. Consider the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke and his discourse about the final judgment in Matthew. We are told that we will be judged by how well we love the least of our brothers and sisters. The roots of Catholic social doctrine can also be traced to the writings of Catholic thinkers such as St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine of Hippo. The official social teachings of the Catholic Church began in 1891 When Pope Leo XIII issued his encyclical, Rerum Novarum, on the condition of capital and labor. In it, he addressed the exploitation of the working class at the height of the Industrial Revolution. I want to share with you now 10 key principles of the social doctrine of our church. One, the sanctity of life and the dignity of the human person. The U.S. bishops remind us that the Catholic Church proclaims that human life is sacred and the dignity of the human person is the foundation of a moral vision for society. This belief is the foundation of all the principles of our social teaching. This principle refers to the intrinsic value of a person created in the image and likeness of God and redeemed by Christ. Human life is a gift from God. And Pope Francis reminds us that every life is sacred. Every human person is endowed with inalienable dignity. And our catechism tells us human life must be respected and promoted absolutely from the moment of conception. Every person, from the moment of conception to natural death, has inherent dignity and a right to life consistent with that dignity. Human dignity comes from God, not from any human quality or accomplishment, says the U.S. bishops. To be pro-life is to be pro-all life. As Pope Francis states, even the weakest and most vulnerable, the sick, the old, the unborn, and the poor are masterpieces of God's creation, made in his own image, destined to live forever and deserving of utmost reverence and respect. Authentic integral human development is about the whole person and every person. Since everything is connected, we must stand up not only for our own dignity, but also for the dignity of others. We must become advocates for those whose dignity is being trampled upon daily. In promoting the dignity of the human person, we need to examine policies, practices, and procedures in our country and in our world that stand as obstacles to this goal. The equal dignity of each person demands that we strive for fairer and more humane conditions so that everyone can realize his or her potential. As we promote the sanctity of life and the dignity of the human person, let us resolve never to give up in our efforts to reject the culture of death that threatens to overwhelm us, for example, abortion, euthanasia, etc. Second principle, the family. The 1963 Catholic Charter of the Rights of the Family defines family as a community of love and solidarity, which is uniquely suited to teach and transmit cultural, ethical, social, spiritual, and religious values, essential for the development and well-being of its own members and of society. End of quote. St. John Paul II reminded us that the future of humanity passes by way of the family. He referred to the family as the first and vital cell of society. In his apostolic exhortation, called The Christian Family in the Modern World, Familiaris Consortio, he said, the essence and the role of the family are in the final analysis specified by love. Hence, the family has as its mission to guard, reveal, and communicate love. While various forms of families exist in Trinidad and Tobago and in the world, and we must respect the inherent dignity of each child of God, as Catholics, we must be aware of and promote the Church's teaching on marriage and the family. Pope Francis emphasized the importance of love, faith, and community in the family. He says that marriage is an extraordinary good, a good of extraordinary value for everyone, for the spouses themselves, for the children, for all families with whom they form relationships, for the entire church, and for all of humanity. Read more about Pope Francis's views on the family in his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love. He reminds us that no family drops down from heaven perfectly formed. Families need constantly to grow and mature in their ability to love. He notes that social changes are altering the living conditions of marriage and families all over the world, and that prolonged and multiple crises are putting a strain on family life. His antidote to this was to rediscover the value of the family as the source and origin of the social order. as the vital cell of a fraternal society capable of caring for the common whole. End of quote. He says the family is good for society insofar as it is a mere aggregation, not insofar as it's a mere aggregation of individuals, but insofar as it is a relationship founded in a bond of mutual perfection. The good of the family, says Pope Francis, consists in sharing relationships of family love, faithful love, trust, cooperation, reciprocity, which brings about their happiness. The family humanizes people through the relationship of we, not I, we, and at the same time promotes each person's legitimate differences. If we are to promote and protect family life, we must create conditions within our communities that will allow the family to flourish. Too many of our families live on the margins. Our catechism paragraphs 2207 to 2211 state the family should live in such a way that its members learn to care and take responsibility for the young, the old, the sick, the differently able, the poor. Family must be helped and defended by appropriate social measures. Where families cannot fulfill their responsibilities, other social bodies have the duty of helping them and of supporting the institution of the family. Governments can and must do more to improve the quality of life of our families. Investing in families is investing in society as a whole. Therefore, let's invest in our families and build a society in which all families can flourish as intended by God. The third principle, community participation and the common good. The World Synod of Catholic Bishops document Justice in the World states that Christians should act as a leaven in the world, in their family, professional, social, cultural, and political life. In a global culture driven by excessive individualism, they say, our church teaches us that the human person is both sacred and social. We realize our dignity and rights in relationship with others, in community. Human beings grow and achieve fulfillment in community. Human dignity can only be realized and protected in the context of relationships with the wider society. How we organize our society in economics and politics, in law and policy, directly affects human dignity and the capacity of individuals to grow in community. Our church tells us that we must actively work to ensure fairness, equity, and inclusion for all members by addressing systemic inequalities and promoting equal access to resources and opportunities, essentially prioritizing the well-being of the whole community by combating oppression and promoting justice for everyone. The role of government and other institutions is to protect human life and human dignity and to promote the common good. The whole reason, says St. John the 23rd in his encyclical Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth, the whole reason for the existence of civil authorities is the realization of the common good. Our catechism reminds us it is necessary that all participate, each according to his or her position and role in promoting the common good. This obligation is inherent in the dignity of the human person. This principle of participation states every person and association have a right and a duty to participate actively in shaping society and to promote the well-being of all, especially the poor and vulnerable. People have a right, the right and duty to take part in decisions that affect their lives. This includes the ability to voice concerns, influence decision makers, and take part in decision-making processes. The common good is, and I quote, the totality of social conditions allowing persons to achieve their communal and individual fulfillment. That's a quote from Benedict XVI. And our catechism tells us that social justice is linked to the common good and the exercise of authority. Social justice can be obtained only in respecting the transcendent dignity of each person. Each of us has a duty to use our God-given talents to build the common good, the good of each person. of every person and every dimension of the person. Building the common good also requires us to consider whether or not we are good stewards of God's creation. We have much work to do to promote integral ecology, which is inextricably linked to integral human development. Everything, Pope Francis says, is connected. Read Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. He reminds us that an integral ecology is inseparable from the notion of the common good, a central and unifying principle of social ethics. Underlying the principle of the common good is respect for the human person as such, endowed with basic and inalienable rights, ordered to his or her integral development. It has also to do with the overall welfare of society and the development of a variety of intermediate groups, applying the principle of subsidiarity. Outstanding among these groups is the family as the basic cell of society. Finally, the common good calls for social peace, the stability and security provided by a certain order, which cannot be achieved without particular concern for distributive justice. Whenever it is violated, violence always ensues. Society as a whole, and the state in particular, are obliged to defend and promote the common good. See paras 164 to 170 of the compendium, which focuses on the common good. The fourth principle, the preferential option for the poor and vulnerable. Pope Francis urges us to hear the cry of the poor, who he says are a true presence of Jesus in our midst. As you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me, says in Matthew. He reminded us of the need to stand in solidarity with the poor. Remember the words of St. Paul, if one member suffers, all suffer together. Pope Francis asked us to make a serious examination of conscience to see if we are truly capable of hearing the cry of the poor and responding. Carol Glatz reported that during World Day of the Poor on the 17th of November last year, 2024, Pope Francis made an appeal to the entire Catholic Church, all world governments, and international organizations. He said, please, let us not forget the poor. He said, Christians can and must enkindle lights of justice and solidarity, even as the shadows of our closed world deepen. He called on Christians to practice a faith that inspires action, urging the Catholic Church, governments, and organizations to assist the poor and marginalized. Our faith should lead us, he says, to open our eyes to the sufferings of the world and the misfortunes of the poor, and so exercise the very compassion of Jesus Christ. He said, asking the faithful to reflect on whether their hearts are moved to look at, touch, and concretely help those experiencing difficulty, or if they prefer to look away. The Christian faith must generate in us a mysticism with open eyes, not a spirituality that flees from the world, he said. The Pope encouraged the faithful also to pay attention to how they live each day, being attentive to their lifestyle and the environment, and to a tenacious pursuit of justice, dedication to sharing our goods, and with those who are poorer, and the social and political commitment to improving reality around us. The US bishops have said a basic moral test is how the most vulnerable members are faring in society. In a society marred by deepening divisions between rich and poor, our tradition recalls the story of the Last Judgment in Matthew and instructs us to put the needs of the poor and vulnerable first. We are to respond not only to their immediate needs, but to address unjust structures that may adversely affect them from achieving their potential. Injustice, says Pope Francis, is the perverse root of poverty. The cry of the poor daily becomes stronger, but heard less. He says no one can remain insensitive to the inequalities that persist in the world. He said Lazarus is a good example of the silent cry of the poor throughout the ages and the contradictions of a world in which immense wealth and resources are in the hands of a few. Goal 1 of the Sustainable Development Goals calls for an end to poverty in all its manifestations by 2030. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, it is estimated that more than 20% of our citizens live below the poverty line. Many are trapped in poverty for generations. According to one definition, those who are socially excluded suffer from a combination of linked problems, such as unemployment, poor skills, low incomes, poor housing, high crime environments, bad health, and family breakdown. These different dimensions of social exclusion prevent many persons from participating fully in the life of society. The Vatican II document, Gaudium et Spes, the Church in the Modern World, states everyone has the right to possess a sufficient amount of the earth's goods for themselves and their family. This has been the opinion of the fathers and doctors of the church, who taught that people are bound to come to the aid of the poor and to do so not merely out of their superfluous goods. In Fratelli Tutti and Fraternity and Social Friendship, Pope Francis challenges the mistaken belief that the marketplace will solve all problems through spillover or trickle theories. In light of these challenges, the Pope affirms the need for full integral human development. As he observes in Fratelli Tutti, his encyclical, he said, some economic rules have proved effective for growth, but not for integral human development. Wealth has increased, but together with inequality, and the result that there are new forms of poverty emerging. The fifth principle, rights and responsibilities. The church has always sought to educate us about rights and responsibilities. For example, Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum focused on the rights and duties of capital and labor. Our church tells us that the roots of human dignity are to be found in the dignity that belongs to each human being. The ultimate source of human rights is found in man himself and in God, his creator. These rights are universal, inviolable, and inalienable. Human rights are to be respected not only individually, but as a whole. Protecting them only partially would imply a kind of failure to recognize them. The first right is the right to life, from conception to its natural death. The field of human rights has expanded to include the rights of peoples and nations. In fact, what is true for the individual is also true for peoples. As well as the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, read St. John the 23rd's Charter of Rights in his 1963 encyclical Peace on Earth, and St. John Paul II's List of Rights in his 1991 encyclical The 100th Year. All rights are indivisible, so we have to protect them together. Remember, though, that our rights are not more important than our duties or responsibilities. We have a duty to stand in solidarity with those whose rights are being trampled upon. For example, victims of human trafficking and other crimes, poverty, hunger, migrants, refugees, loneliness, and so on. Corresponding to our rights are duties and responsibilities to one another, to our families, and to the larger society. Rights should be understood and exercised in a moral framework rooted in the dignity of the human person. Our church tells us those who claim their own rights, yet altogether forget or neglect to carry out their respective duties, are people who build with one hand and destroy with the other. And remember, on the last day of judgment, Christ will judge us on how we demonstrated love of neighbor. If I was hungry and you gave me food, I was thirsty and you gave me drink, I was a stranger and you made me welcome, naked and you clothed me, sick and you visited me, in prison and you came to see me. That's from Matthew. I tell you solemnly, Insofar as you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. The sixth principle, caring for God's creation. The goods of the earth are gifts which we hold on trust. In Genesis, we read that we have a duty to cultivate and care for the earth. As Christians, we cannot be indifferent to environmental degradation. In order to be good stewards, we must reconcile ourselves with God's creation. God destined the earth and all it contains for all people and nations, so that all created things would be shared fairly and by all humankind under the guidance of justice tempered by charity. And that's from Gaudi et Spes, the Church in the Modern World. Globally, biodiversity, the various kinds of life forms on Earth, is being lost faster than it recovers, and it is the poor who feel the brunt of this moral crisis. Human activity is contributing to climate change and global warming. In Trinidad and Tobago, we continue to pollute our environment. Psalm 24 tells us that the earth and its fullness belong to the Lord, the world and all that dwell in it. Years ago, Pope Benedict XVI told us, our earth speaks to us and we must listen if we want to survive. He said, we are all in the world, not as owners, but as tenants and stewards. And read Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. He calls for conversion of hearts, minds, and lifestyle. If we are to save our planet, he says, dialogue and education can help us to escape the spiral of self-destruction which currently engulfs us. He calls us to promote authentic human ecology, which connects ecological issues and life issues. There can be no renewal of our relationship with nature without a renewal of humanity itself. There can be no ecology without an adequate anthropology. St. Francis is the example par excellence of care for the vulnerable and of an integral ecology lived out joyfully and authentically. He was particularly concerned for God's creation and for the poor and outcast. The seventh principle, solidarity. Christ calls us to live in fraternity. The compendium of the social doctrine of the church states that solidarity is the firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good of all and of each individual, because we are all really responsible for each other. We are all interconnected and interdependent. We all have a common origin in Jesus Christ. Solidarity means the willingness to see others as another self, and so to regard injustice committed against another as no less serious than an injustice against oneself. Vatican II stressed the need for the Catholic Church to stand in solidarity with the whole family. And opening lines states, the joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the people of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. Pope Benedict XVI said, true solidarity, though it begins with an acknowledgement of the equal worth of the other, comes to fulfillment only when I willingly place my life at the service of others. Sadly, as Pope Francis has said, as society becomes even more globalized, ever more globalized, it makes us neighbors, but does not make us brothers and sisters. He said that in Fratelli Tutti. Solidarity, he says, refers to the virtue enabling the human family to share fully the treasure of material and spiritual goods. We are one human family. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers, wherever they may be. Loving our neighbor has global dimensions in a shrinking world. At the core of the virtue of solidarity is the pursuit of justice and peace. Pope Francis has said, we are called to live not as one without others, above or against others, but with and for others. The many situations of inequality, poverty, and injustice are signs not only of a profound lack of fraternity, but also of the absence of a culture of solidarity. New ideologies characterized by rampant individualism, egocentrism, and materialistic consumerism, weaken social bonds, fueling that throwaway mentality which leads to contempt for and the abandonment of the weakest and those considered useless. The eighth principle, the dignity of work and the rights of workers. Our church believes that work is important. In 1891, Pope Leo XIII wrote the encyclical Rerum Novarum of Capital and Labor, which highlighted the dignity of work and called for changes that would protect the rights of workers. It was the time of the Industrial Revolution. As writers have noted, the development of machinery created unsafe conditions and demand for longer working hours and child labor. The compendium describes Rerum Novarum as a heartfelt defense of the inalienable dignity of workers, but it also stressed the importance of the right to property, the principle of cooperation among the social classes, the rights of the weak and the poor, the obligation of workers and employers, and the right to form associations. God has commanded that we work. We read in Genesis that he put man and woman in the Garden of Eden with a command to cultivate and care for the earth. The compendium tells us that work is required for man and woman in order to respond to the need to maintain and develop his or her own humanity. St. John Paul II said in his encyclical Laborem Exercens on human work, Jesus became like us in all things, he said, and developed most of the years of his life on earth to manual work at the carpenter's bench. His foster father, St. Joseph, is the patron saint of workers and laborers and of social justice. Pope Francis reminds us that work is fundamental to the dignity of a person created in the image of God. Therefore, it is said that work is sacred. It gives one the ability to maintain oneself, one's family, and to contribute to the growth of one's own nation. He says, there is no worse material poverty than the poverty which prevents people from earning their bread and deprives them of the dignity of work. In his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, he tells us that we were created with a vocation to work. The goal should not be that technological progress increasingly replaces human work, for this would be detrimental to humanity. Work is a necessity, part of the meaning of life on this earth, a path to growth, human development, and personal fulfillment. Helping the poor financially must always be a provisional solution in the face of pressing needs. The broader objective should always be to allow them a dignified life through work. As St. Basil the Great said, work honors the gifts and talents that God has given to each one of us. The US bishops have said, work is more than a way to make a living. It is a form of continuing participation in God's creation. If the dignity of work is to be protected, then the basic rights of workers must be respected. What are those rights? They include the right to productive work, to decent and fair wages, to humane working conditions, to form and join trade unions, to reasonable limitation of working hours, to private property, and to economic initiative. The economy exists to serve the people, not the other way around. The compendium reminds us that work is for man and not man for work. Pope Benedict XVI said, work is of fundamental importance to the fulfillment of the human being and to the development of society. Thus, it must always be organized and carried out with full respect for human dignity and must always serve the common good. At the same time, it is indispensable that people not allow themselves to be enslaved by work or to idolize it, claiming to find in it the ultimate and definitive meaning of life. Pope Francis has reminded us that work is an important expression of human dignity and of caring for one's family. But today, there is a dangerous tendency, he says, to consider workers' families' obligations as an obstacle to productivity and profit. But let's ask ourselves, what productivity, he said, and for whom? Work in its thousand forms, beginning with housework, is about caring for the common good, providing for one's family, and cooperating with God in creating goods and services that are useful to others. End of quote. The Vatican II document, Gaudium et Spes, lists among the things that are offensive to life and mitigate against the honor of the Creator as degrading working conditions where people are treated as mere tools for profits rather than free and responsible persons. The ninth principle, the promotion of peace and nonviolence. Our world is sorely ill. It craves for peace and nonviolence. In this world of peace day message in 1972, St. Paul VI rightly said, if you want peace, work for justice. He taught that peace is more than just the absence of war, but the social conditions that allow all people to develop fully. He believed that peace is the fruit of justice and love. Vatican II document Gaudium et Spes reminds us that peace is rightly and appropriately called an enterprise of justice. As followers of Christ, we must develop our understanding of the meaning of the gift of peace that was given to us, as well as the peace that Jesus gave to us. He promised that God would send the Holy Spirit to be our teacher, counselor, helper, comforter, consoler, and advocate. The Holy Spirit is a gift given to us by the Father. Pope Francis suggests that we should ask God for the grace of the wisdom to make peace in the little things of each day, but aiming at the horizons of the whole of humanity, especially today in which we are living a war and all are seeking peace. There are countless wars being waged globally at this moment. Violence, conflict, terrorism, and other forms of crime, including white-collar crime, threaten to overwhelm us. Violence seems endemic across the world. Countries are spending trillions of dollars on weapons of mass destruction, while many of their citizens go hungry and live in abject poverty. Archbishop Desmond Tutu rightly said, stability and peace will not come from the barrel of a gun, because peace without justice is an impossibility. St. Paul VI said, the world must be educated to love peace, to build it up, and defend it. Pope Francis reminds us that the new evangelization calls on every baptized person to be a peacemaker. To achieve meaningful peace, we must address the critical issues outlined in the Sustainable Development Goals. Archbishop Jason Gordon reminds us that peace is the establishment of right relationships within and across society. The high violence and rate of crime in our country is a reflection of wrong relationships, unhealed hurts, and injustices in our society. Peace requires conversion of hearts, which means change. Peace comes at a cost. We want someone to deliver peace without it costing us anything. But that is not possible. We all have a part to play. He reminds us that Pope Francis calls us to be artisans of peace. But as Archbishop says, to be artisans of peace, we have to be at peace with ourselves. This is the first challenge. To be artisans of peace, we need to start with Christ, not as peripheral to our existence, but as core and center of our identity. Then we have the right relationship with God and self, right relationship with neighbor and creation. Answering the call to be artisans of peace must begin in the family. Artisans of peace relate to others in a way of peace and nonviolence, not just in the family, but also in the school, in church, and workplace. To build peace in our nation, we need to work tirelessly at reforming how we communicate and relate with each other, says the Archbishop. Nonviolence begins with me. It spreads to all others whom we meet and with whom we come into contact. It is a foundation for peace and transformation in Trinidad and Tobago. As temples of the Holy Spirit, we are called to be peacemakers. Peace is both a gift and a task, one we must pray for and work for, striving daily to build a culture in which peace is respected as a fundamental right. And remember, we will not attain peace until we reconcile with God's creation. As Pope Francis reminds us, our planet is a mother for all of us. We must hand it on to our children, cared for and improved, because it's a loan that they make to us. To promote peace, we must address the crime that plagues Trinidad and Tobago, our region, and the world. Sir Dennis Byron, the former president of the Caribbean Court of Justice, said, crime flourishes when the environment is conducive to people behaving in a certain way. Nonviolence begins with each of us. Pope Francis says we must cultivate nonviolence in our most personal thoughts and values. He says Jesus himself offers a manual for this strategy of peacemaking in the Sermon on the Mount. The 8 Beatitudes provide a portrait of the person we could describe as blessed, good, and authentic. He says violence is not a cure for a broken world. All of us want peace. Many people build it day by day through small gestures and acts. He says nothing is impossible if we turn to God in prayer. Everyone can be an artisan of peace. We must say no to hatred and violence with action, and yes to fraternity and reconciliation. Mahatma Gandhi was right when he said, non-violence is not a garment to be put on and off at will. Its seat is in the heart, and it must be an inseparable part of our very being. Peace must be born of mutual trust between nations rather than imposed on them through fear of one another's weapons. Hence, everyone must labor to put an end to the last of the arms race and to make a true beginning of disarmament. And that was a quote from Gaudium et Spes. We must address the barriers to peace. And I quote Pope St. Paul VI, Popularum Progressio on the Development of Peoples. He said, excessive economic, social, and cultural inequalities among peoples arouse tensions and conflicts and are a danger to peace. The 10th and final principle I'll focus on, the role of government and subsidiarity. The social doctrine of our church teaches that the state has a positive moral function. It is an instrument to promote human dignity, to protect human rights, and build a common good. Its purpose is to assist citizens in fulfilling their responsibility to others in society. Since in a large and complex society, these responsibilities cannot adequately be carried out on a one-to-one basis, citizens need the help of government in fulfilling these responsibilities and promoting the common good. In 2013, Pope Francis stated in his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, in the joy of the gospel, it is the responsibility of the state to safeguard and promote the common good, based on the principles of subsidiarity and solidarity, and fully committed to political dialogue and consensus building. It plays a fundamental role, one which cannot be delegated, in working for the integral development of all. This role at present calls for profound social humility. According to the principle of subsidiarity, the functions of government should be performed at the lowest possible level, as long as they can be performed adequately. When they cannot, then higher levels of government should intervene to provide help. And that's from the US Bishop's document, Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. This way, we promote the dignity of all persons and support the social justice principle of participation, which teaches that all people have a right to participate in economic, political, and cultural life of society. It is a fundamental demand of justice and a requirement for human dignity that all people be assured a minimum level of participation in the community. Conversely, it is wrong for a person or a group to be excluded unfairly or to be unable to participate in society. Pope Francis referred to this principle in his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si. Let us keep in mind, he said, the principle of subsidiarity, which grants freedom to develop the capabilities present at every level of society, while also demanding a greater sense of responsibility for the common good for those who wield greater power. In 1995, St. John Paul II stated, the value of democracy stands or falls with the truths and values which it embodies and promotes. And sadly, we live in a time of moral relativism. So we need to remember that quote. What are the values that define us as a people? What is the role of the government in ensuring that core values are reflected in its policies, procedures, and practices so that all may benefit from the resources that God our Father has made available to us? In his 2019 Easter message, Pope Francis prayed that the risen Lord may move all those with political responsibilities to work to end social injustices, abuses, and acts of violence, and take the concrete steps needed to heal divisions and offer the population the help they need. Even, he said, even if they believe certain politicians to be wicked, Christians should pray that they can govern well, that they can love their people, that they can serve their people, that they can be humble, he said. At the same time, the Pope reflected on the role of those who hold political power, stressing the need for humility and love, reflecting on the gospel of the centurion, who humbly and confidently asked for the healing of his servant. The Holy Father explained that a leader who does not love cannot govern. At best, they can discipline, they can give a little bit of order, but they cannot govern. In addition, he emphasized, you cannot govern without loving the people and without humility. Every man and every woman who has to take up the service of government must ask themselves two questions. Do I love my people in order to serve them better? Am I humble and do I listen to everybody, to diverse opinions in order to choose the best path? If you don't ask these questions, your governance will not be good. The man or woman who governs, who loves his people, is a humble man or woman. In conclusion, let us remember that prayers are essential to social justice work. Indeed, our social ministry must be anchored in prayer, where we uncover the depths of God's call to seek justice and pursue peace. Prayer helps believers to apply their faith to everyday situations. During this Jubilee year, let us commit to develop our awareness of the Church's social doctrine and be exemplars by ensuring that the various principles inform our actions and our daily lives. People are more likely to embrace these principles if they see that they've been truly guided, that they're guiding our lives each day. I end with the words of Father Stephen Alexander, the General Manager of CCSJ, the Catholic Commission for Social Justice. The 2025 Jubilee is not just a time for personal renewal, he said, but a communal call to action. It is an invitation for Catholics to be at the forefront of promoting social justice, advocating for the marginalized, and working towards a more just and compassionate society. The Jubilee year of 2025 offers us a unique opportunity to live out the gospel in concrete ways by actively engaging in works of mercy and justice, he says. As we become pilgrims of hope, let us embrace the call to social justice, recognizing that our faith demands action in the face of injustice. May this 2025 Jubilee inspire us to be agents of mercy and justice, reflecting the love of Christ in a world in desperate need of healing and hope. End of quote by Father Stephen. I thank you, and I hope that you find this recording helpful. Please share it with others. Please reread, re-listen to the different principles and strive to put them in action. Thank you. God bless you all.